Oakley had given everything to become a doctor, not as a figure of speech. Literally everything: the late nights, the MCAT prep, the years of undergraduate discipline that had cost her a social life, a normal college experience, and more sleep than she would ever get back. She had done all of it with one understanding that had been spoken out loud by her parents more than once: that the trust fund her grandfather had set up specifically for her medical education would be there when she needed it. Her grandfather had been deliberate about it. He had named her in the documents. He had told her directly, more than once, that her education was protected. He died when Oakley was 22. By the time she was ready to apply to medical school 2 years later, the fund was gone, not reduced, not partially withdrawn for some family emergency she hadn't been told about. Gone. $182,000, moved in increments over 3 years while Oakley was studying, while she was building her application, while she was dreaming about the career her grandfather had wanted to help her build. Her parents had an explanation. They always had explanations, but Oakley had something her parents didn't know about. She had the bank records, and she had a Christmas dinner in 3 weeks. Before Oakley reaches into that bag and puts the first document on that Christmas dinner table, hit subscribe right now. Because what happens in that dining room when her aunt picks up that trust document is something the whole family was not ready for. New videos every single week, and this one is only getting started. Hit like if Oakley deserved to have that fund protected from the very beginning. Drop a comment: have you ever trusted someone completely and discovered the trust was being used against you the whole time? Now let's go back to Boston. Because Oakley just found out the account is empty, and Christmas is 3 weeks away. My name is Oakley. I am 24 years old and I live in Boston, Massachusetts. I have spent the last 6 years of my life in a single sustained effort, becoming a doctor. Not because someone pushed me toward it, not because it was the family expectation, but because I decided at 14 that medicine was the thing I was built for, and I had been moving toward it in a straight line ever since. The MCAT, the undergraduate research, the clinical volunteer hours. The application essays I rewrote 11 times. Every piece of it is chosen deliberately and executed with the kind of discipline that costs you other things: free weekends, normal college experiences, the particular ease of people who aren't carrying a destination everywhere they go. I had done all of it on the foundation of one promise. And then the promise was gone. My grandfather established the trust when I was 12 years old, not as a casual gesture or a vague intention to help someday, but as a formal legal document with a named administrator, specific terms, and one clear purpose. He sat me down in his study the summer after 6th grade and explained it to me in the direct way he explained everything. He said he had set aside money for my medical education, that it was mine when I needed it, that it was protected, that no one could touch it without proper authorization. He said the amount was $182,000. He said he had watched me since I was small, and he knew what I was going to do with my life before I could name it myself. He underlined my name twice on the instruction page and showed me so I would know it was real. My grandfather passed away in October of my senior year of college. He had been ill for 14 months, long enough that his death was not a shock, but still arrived with the specific weight that the death of someone central to your life always carries regardless of preparation. I flew home for the service and stayed for 4 days, and then flew back to Boston because I had a biochemistry exam in 6 days, and he would have been the first person to tell me to go back and take it. That was the kind of man he was, practical and loving in the same breath. I grieved in the particular way of people who have too much to do to grieve fully in real time, in pieces, at unexpected moments, while studying, while running, while sitting in the library at 2 in the morning with his voice somewhere in the back of my mind telling me to keep going. I contacted the trust administrator in September, 2 years after my grandfather passed, right on schedule with the medical school application timeline I had mapped out during my junior year. I had the trust documentation. I had the administrator's contact information from the original paperwork my grandfather had given me. I sent an email requesting the process for beginning disbursement toward medical school fees. The administrator responded within a day. His email was professional and careful, and it told me, in the precise language of someone delivering information they understood was going to be difficult to receive, that the account had a current balance of $0. I read that email 3 times. Then I called the administrator directly and asked him to confirm what I had read. He confirmed it: $182,000. Gone. I called my parents from my apartment, standing in the kitchen. The administrator's email was still open on my laptop across the room. My mom answered first. I told her what the administrator had said. There was a pause, shorter than it should have been for someone receiving this as genuinely new information. And then she said yes, she had been meaning to talk to me about that. She said there had been a family emergency a few years back, that the fund had needed to be accessed temporarily, that it was a complicated situation that she would explain properly when we had more time. My dad got on the line and used the same language: family emergency, temporary situation, complicated. He said they had every intention of making it right. He said they loved me. He said they were sorry I had found out this way. I asked what way they had planned for me to find out. Nobody answered that. I asked for documentation, a clear accounting of how the money had been used when each withdrawal had been made, what the family emergency had been. My dad said he would put everything together and send it over. He said it might take a few days to compile, but he would get it to me. I said I appreciated that. I said I would wait to hear from them. I got off the call and stood in my kitchen for a while. The specific thing I was feeling was not what people might have expected. It was not the hot, immediate devastation of someone blindsided. It was the colder, steadier feeling of someone whose suspicion has just been confirmed. Because the pause before my mom answered had been too short. And my dad had known what documentation meant before I finished asking for it. 3 weeks passed. No documentation arrived. My parents called twice, my mom on a Wednesday about nothing specific, my dad on a Sunday to ask about my applications, and whether I was eating enough and how Boston was in the fall. Both calls were warm and normal and completely free of any reference to the conversation we had had or the documentation that was coming. I did not bring it up. I answered their questions. I said Boston was good and applications were progressing, and yes, I was eating. I noted the date of each call in my phone. And I sat with the growing certainty that the documentation was never going to arrive, not because it didn't exist, but because what it showed was something my parents had no interest in putting on paper and handing to me. Christmas was 3 weeks away. The whole family would be there. I started making my own plans. Oakley did not wait for her parents to send documentation that had already stopped feeling like it was coming. 3 days after the last unanswered call, she contacted the trust administrator directly, formally, in writing, identifying herself as the named beneficiary of the trust and requesting the complete transaction history for the account from the date of her grandfather's passing to the present. She was specific in her language because she had spent an evening reading the trust document carefully, and she understood exactly what her standing was. The administrator responded within 48 hours. He said the records would be compiled and sent within 5 business days. She thanked him professionally and went back to her application work. She did not tell her parents she had made the request. The records arrived on a Thursday morning, a PDF attachment, clean formatting, every transaction logged with its date, amount, and destination account. Oakley opened it at her kitchen table with her coffee and read through it once quickly and then again slowly. 27 separate withdrawals. Spread across 3 years with a spacing that she recognized immediately as deliberate. Each transaction timed at intervals that kept the amounts just below the threshold that would have triggered automatic notification to the named beneficiary. She had studied enough science to recognize a controlled variable when she saw one. These withdrawals had not been made in a panic or a single desperate moment. They had been made carefully, over time, by someone who understood the notification thresholds and had worked specifically within them. She printed the transaction records and laid them beside her laptop, and spent a Saturday afternoon referencing the withdrawal dates against her own memory and her family's social media history. The first cluster of withdrawals, 4 transactions over 6 months totaling just under $30,000, aligned with a kitchen renovation her parents had posted about extensively, the before and after photos still visible on her mom's profile. A single large withdrawal 18 months in corresponded precisely with the month her parents had purchased a new car. She remembered the photo of her dad standing beside it in the driveway with his hand on the hood. A later series of withdrawals matched a European vacation she had seen in holiday photos. Every dollar had gone somewhere visible. None of it had gone toward anything her grandfather had intended. She found an estate attorney through her university's legal referral service, someone with no connection to her family, no prior context, just a professional with the relevant expertise. She sent the trust document, and the withdrawal records through the secure client portal the evening before their consultation, and arrived at the meeting having already read everything twice more. The attorney walked through the trust terms carefully, and then walked through the withdrawal history against those terms. He said the restriction was unambiguous. The fund was established exclusively for educational expenses, with no provision for family emergency access or trustee discretionary spending. He said every single one of the 27 withdrawals had violated the terms of the instrument as written. He said the word unauthorized and did not qualify it. The attorney laid out her options directly. He was the kind of professional who understood that clarity was more useful than cushioning in situations like this. He said she had standing to file a civil claim against the trustees for breach of fiduciary duty, her parents, who had assumed the trustee role after her grandfather's passing. He said the documentation she had was exceptionally strong: the original trust instrument, the transaction history, the clear gap between stated purpose and actual use. He said damages could include the full fund amount plus applicable interest and legal costs. He said the case was not complicated from a legal standpoint. The facts were documented and the terms were clear. He asked how she wanted to proceed. Oakley said she needed to think about the timing. She said she had a family event coming up. She called the attorney the following Monday and gave him a specific instruction: prepare the full legal summary, document everything in the format it would need to be in if she decided to proceed formally, but hold all action until she contacted him with the go-ahead. She said she wanted everything ready but nothing filed yet. He confirmed he understood and said the summary would be prepared within the week. She thanked him and ended the call. She had two things now: the documented truth and the legal framework around it. What she did not yet have was the right moment. She thought about her grandfather's dining room table. She thought about the family gatherings he had hosted every Christmas for as long as she could remember. She thought about how many people would be at her parents' house in 3 weeks. Jordan had been her closest friend since their first year of undergraduate, the kind of person who asked real questions rather than the questions that made conversations easier. Oakley called her on a Sunday evening and told her everything from the beginning: the empty account, the calls, the withdrawal records, the attorney's assessment, the secondary trustee detail she had not yet discovered but was close to finding. Jordan listened without interrupting, which was one of the things Oakley valued most about her. When Oakley finished, Jordan was quiet for a moment and then asked, "What are you going to do?" Oakley looked at the folder on her desk: the trust document, the transaction records, the attorney's preliminary notes all organized and labeled. She said, "I'm going to wait for Christmas. The whole family will be there." Jordan said, "Good." Oakley did not pause her medical school application while she waited for documentation that was never coming. She sat at her desk in her Boston apartment and recalculated everything: tuition projections, living expenses, the federal loan limits she would now need to maximize, the additional private loans that would fill the gaps the federal system didn't cover. She had spent 2 years building an application strong enough to get her into the programs she wanted. She was not going to let the money situation determine whether she submitted it. She adjusted her financial aid forms with the precision she brought to everything, filed her primary application on schedule, and noted the estimated debt load she was now carrying in place of the fund her grandfather had specifically built to prevent exactly this. Her parents called on a Thursday evening, her mom's voice carrying the particular warmth it always carried when she wasn't thinking about anything difficult, which apparently the conversation they had 3 weeks ago no longer qualified as. She talked about a neighbor's renovation project and a recipe she had tried, and whether Oakley had seen the weather forecast for Boston that week. Oakley answered everything naturally and waited for any reference to the documentation. It didn't come. Her dad called 4 days later, asked about her applications, said he was proud of her, and mentioned a football game he had watched that weekend. 6 minutes of comfortable conversation with a man who owed her $182,000 and was apparently completely at ease. She said goodnight and added the date to her phone notes. She drove to the cemetery on a Sunday morning in late November, not because she had planned it as a specific act, but because she had been carrying the weight of what she knew for 3 weeks and needed somewhere to put it that wasn't a phone call or a legal document. She sat beside her grandfather's headstone for an hour with a cup of coffee going cold in her hand and talked to him the way she had always talked to him, directly, without softening things. She told him what she had found. She told him about the 27 withdrawals and the kitchen renovation and the car. She told him about the calls that pretended nothing had happened. She told him what she was going to do at Christmas. She thought he would have understood completely. She thought he would have told her to go ahead. The certified copy of the original trust document arrived in a manila envelope on a Tuesday, requested through the administrator's office, official seal, every page accounted for. Oakley sat at her kitchen table and went through it carefully from the first page to the last. The legal language was precise and unambiguous. The fund was established exclusively for Oakley's educational expenses, Withdrawal for any other purpose required dual trustee authorization and written documentation of the qualifying expenditure. She turned to the instructions section, the page her grandfather had shown her in his study when she was 12. His handwriting was in the margin beside her name, a note in blue pen, slightly compressed the way his handwriting always was. Her name appeared twice in the printed text. Both times he had drawn a line underneath it in the same blue pen. Her Aunt Diane, her grandfather's daughter from his first marriage, quiet and precise and someone Oakley had always trusted with the specific trust reserved for people who tell you the truth without being asked, called on a Thursday evening to check in. She called regularly since Oakley's grandfather had passed, a habit she had established without announcement and maintained without interruption. Oakley listened to the call carefully and asked a few gentle questions about the trust, framed casually, as if she were simply trying to understand the document structure. Her aunt's responses made something very clear. She had no idea the fund had been touched. She spoke about it in the present tense as something that existed, intact, waiting for Oakley to need it. Oakley took careful notes after the call ended. Her aunt mentioned something during the call that she offered as a simple point of information, that her grandfather had named her as a secondary trustee in the original document, a role she had understood as largely ceremonial given that Oakley's parents were the primary trustees. She said she had received the original documentation when the trust was established and had filed it without much thought since her role had seemed to be a backup provision rather than an active one. Oakley wrote down the secondary trustee and underlined it twice. She pulled up the trust document after the call and found the relevant clause, secondary trustee authorization, required for any withdrawal exceeding a specified threshold. She went back to the withdrawal records. Every single transaction had exceeded that threshold. Her aunt had not been notified of one. Oakley called her estate attorney the following morning and laid out the secondary trustee detail clearly and completely. She heard the attorney take a breath on the other end, the specific sound of someone whose assessment of a situation has just become more serious. He walked her through the implications directly. The secondary trustee notification requirement was not procedural suggestion. It was a legal obligation embedded in the trust instrument. Every withdrawal above the threshold had required her aunt's written authorization. Not one had received it. He said this moved the situation from a breach of trust terms into a more significant category of trustee misconduct, one with clearer legal remedies and a stronger position for Oakley as the named beneficiary. He asked if she wanted to proceed immediately. She said not yet. She said she had one thing she needed to do first. Oakley left Boston at 7 in the morning on Christmas Eve, 4 hours of highway through the particular gray quiet of a New England December, the kind of drive that gave you nothing to look at and everything to think about. She had her folder on the passenger seat, not in her bag on the seat where she could see it, the trust document, the withdrawal records, the attorney's legal summary. The certified copy with her grandfather's handwriting in the margin. She had organized everything the night before with the same methodical attention she brought to exam preparation, everything in order, everything labeled, nothing that could be questioned for accuracy. She stopped once for gas and coffee. She arrived at her parents' house at 11. The Christmas wreath was on the door. The lights were on. Everything looked completely normal. Her parents' house was already full when she arrived, the particular organized chaos of a family Christmas, where multiple generations occupied the same space with varying degrees of comfort and noise. Her Aunt Diane was there, seated at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, the same measured composure she always carried. Her Uncle Robert and his wife were in the living room. 3 cousins she saw twice a year were somewhere upstairs. Her mom greeted her at the door with a hug that was warm and genuine and completely free of any awareness of what was in the folder on the passenger seat. Her dad came from the kitchen and hugged her too, and said she looked thin and asked about Boston. The house smelled like her mom's cooking. Everything performed the appearance of a normal family Christmas with practiced ease. Dinner was served at 6, the long table extended to fit everyone, the good china her mom reserved for Christmas and Easter, the particular abundance of a holiday meal that had been planned for weeks. Her dad stood at the head of the table before anyone began eating and raised his glass with the comfortable authority of a man in his own home on Christmas Eve. He talked about family, about what it meant to gather in the same room year after year, about gratitude for health and presence, and the particular gift of people who chose to show up for each other. He said the year had been difficult in places, but that they had come through it as families did together. He said he was grateful for every person at the table. He looked at Oakley when he said it. She held his gaze and raised her glass. The meal moved through its first course with the easy rhythm of a family that knew how to be comfortable together, in ways that didn't require honesty. Her mom asked about her applications midway through the soup, leaning forward with the specific bright interest she displayed when she wanted to perform pride in Oakley's accomplishments for the wider table audience. She asked which programs Oakley had applied to, whether the essays had gone well, whether she had heard anything yet. She said it with the warm confidence of a mother who believed her daughter's path was unfolding exactly as planned. Oakley answered each question directly and completely: the programs, the timeline, the interview invitations she had already received. She answered everything her mom asked. And then she said she actually had something she wanted to share with the whole family. The shift was subtle at first, the natural pause of a table turning its attention toward someone who has indicated they have something to say. Her cousins looked up. Her Uncle Robert set his spoon down. Her Aunt Diane put her teacup on the saucer with the particular stillness of someone who had been waiting for something without knowing what it was. Her parents' expressions were the most telling. Her mom's face carried a brief flicker of something that she smoothed over quickly, a half-second of recognition that the evening might be moving somewhere she had not planned for. Her dad maintained his expression with the practiced steadiness of a man who had been maintaining expressions through difficult things for a long time. Oakley reached down beside her chair and picked up her folder. She placed it on the table. She took the certified trust document from the top of the folder and placed it flat on the table in front of her, not sliding it toward anyone yet, just placing it so the cover page was visible to the people nearest her. She said, "This is the trust my grandfather established when I was 12. Some of you were there when he set it up. All of you knew it existed." She turned to the instruction page, the one with his handwriting in the margin, her name in the printed text with the blue pen lines underneath it. She placed it facing outward so the table could see it. Her Aunt Diane leaned forward. Her aunt's expression moved through recognition into something more alert. Her parents were both looking at the document. Neither of them was looking at Oakley. She placed the withdrawal records beside the trust document, printed cleanly, organized chronologically, each transaction on its own line with the date, the amount, and the receiving account. 27 rows, 3 years of carefully timed withdrawals. She did not read them aloud. She placed them on the table and let the numbers speak in the way numbers spoke, without emotion, without interpretation, without the softening that language allowed. Her Uncle Robert picked up the records and began reading from the top. Her Aunt Diane reached for the trust document and turned to the terms page. Her cousins were quiet. The Christmas meal sat in its serving dishes getting slightly cold. Oakley looked at her parents across the table and said, $182,000. My grandfather named me twice. I've underlined it so it's easy to find. Diane had the trust document in both hands before Oakley finished her sentence, reading it with the focused attention of someone whose professional instincts had been activated, not just her personal ones. She was an accountant by training, and she read financial documents the way other people read familiar language, quickly, precisely, stopping at the significant clauses without being told they were significant. She found the secondary trustee provision on the third page, and her expression changed in a way that was visible to everyone at the table who was watching her face rather than the documents. She looked up at Oakley's parents across the table. She said, "I was never notified." Not as a question, not as an accusation yet, just as a fact she was establishing clearly before anything else was said. Oakley's dad spoke first, setting his wine glass down with the deliberate care of a man preparing to say something he had rehearsed, at least partially, at some level of awareness that this conversation was coming eventually. He said the family had gone through a genuinely difficult financial period 3 years ago, that the fund had been accessed as a temporary measure with every intention of restoration before Oakley reached the point of needing it. He said the timeline had been longer than anticipated. Said the situation had compounded. He said he had never intended for her to discover it the way she had. He said it all in the measured, reasonable tone of someone presenting a difficult thing as a manageable one. Oakley waited until he finished. Then she placed the attorney's legal summary on the table. The attorney's legal summary was 2 pages, clear, professionally formatted, written in the direct language of someone whose job was to say exactly what the documents established without ambiguity. It named Oakley's parents as trustees. It cited the trust terms restricting fund use to educational expenses. It documented the 27 withdrawals with their dates and amounts. It noted the secondary trustee notification requirement and confirmed that no such notifications had been issued for any transaction. It used the phrase trustee misconduct in the second paragraph and did not soften it with qualifications. Oakley's Uncle Robert had been reading the withdrawal records when she placed the summary on the table. He set the records down and picked up the summary without being asked. He read the first paragraph and looked at his brother across the table. He said nothing. His expression said enough. Diane set the trust document down carefully and looked at Oakley's parents with the specific expression of a woman who had processed the relevant information and arrived at a clear position. She said she had received the original trust documentation when Oakley's grandfather established the fund. She said she had understood her role as secondary trustee and had expected to be contacted if the fund was ever accessed beyond the standard parameters. She said she had not received a single notification in 3 years. Not one call, not one email, not one letter. She said she had attended family events with Oakley's parents during that entire period, dinners, holidays, the occasions that filled family calendars, and not once had either of them mentioned that the fund had been touched. She said it steadily, without heat, and the steadiness made it more difficult to sit across from than anger would have been. Her dad's composure broke somewhere between Diane's words and the silence that followed them, not dramatically, not with raised voices or visible collapse, but with the specific quality of a person whose constructed version of events has run out of the structural support it needed to hold its shape. He said he had intended to replace every dollar. He said it with the weight of someone who had been carrying that intention for 3 years and was only now setting it down somewhere it could be examined. He said he had told himself there was time. He said he had told himself she wouldn't need it for another year, then another. Oakley looked at him steadily and said, "When were you going to tell me, Dad? What was the plan for that conversation?" He looked at the table. He did not answer. The room sat with the full picture for a long moment. Not just the amount, not just the legal framework, but the specific human cost of what had happened, laid out in the accumulated silence of a Christmas dinner that had gone somewhere none of them had expected when they sat down. Oakley said it clearly and without performance, that she had spent the past 3 months recalculating her entire financial future, that she was now facing a loan burden that would follow her through her entire medical career, that every year of her residency and her early practice would carry the weight of debt that her grandfather had specifically worked to prevent her from carrying. She said, "He spent his life building something to protect mine. You spent 3 years doing it." The table held that without anyone reaching for their wine. Oakley left her parents' house at 9, not with a dramatic exit, not with a final speech that tied anything into a resolution. She hugged her Aunt Diane in the hallway, and Diane held on for a moment longer than a standard goodbye and said quietly that she would be calling her attorney the following week. Oakley said she knew. She said thank you. She hugged her cousins and her Uncle Robert, and she was warm and present for each of those goodbyes because none of them had done anything except sit at a table and read the truth when it was placed in front of them. She did not hug her parents. She said goodnight to the room and picked up her folder from the table, every document still inside, every page still in order, and walked out the front door past the Christmas wreath and got into her car. She drove back to Boston through the dark quiet of Christmas Eve with the folder on the passenger seat and her grandfather's trust document on top, and his handwriting visible through the clear plastic cover she had put on the front to protect it. She drove the whole 4 hours without music. She didn't need any.